Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 141 of the Citrix Session. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. Today is August 28th, 2023, and we're going to be reviewing a security blog as it relates to Citrix, which, if you ask me, the number one way to secure an environment is to present, not deploy what you're doing. And a lot of security folks aren't that way, but I believe it is a major step in securing your environment. I'm going to review a blog by Monica Grismer, who's been on with us multiple times. The name of the blog is Strengthening Your Citrix Security One Feature at a Time. I would say strengthen your security in general, but in this case, around Citrix. I got Todd Smith on with me. Todd, how's it going?
I'm doing well, Andy. How are you today?
It's good. It's good. You were making a reference to your cabin on your farm and the fact that you bought a cot. Wasn't built for a guy that's 6'8"?
No, it's a couple inches too short. So I'm actually looking at the XL version, the extra long.
Now, okay, I'm gonna pick on you real quick. You knew this was going to be a problem, right?
I did, but to my defense, I did look for one that was already designed for extra tall people, but it wasn't extra tall enough.
You're extra. I'm extra tall. Geremy's tall. I'm extra tall, and you're extra tall.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I'm not used to being the shortest guy in the room, but when I'm in the room with you guys, I have to look up. It's different. That's all.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I'm pretty sure I'm shrinking.
Yeah.
I know I'm getting skinnier. So that was the voice of Geremy Meyers. Geremy runs the technical team on the partner side at Cloud Software Group. Geremy, what's going on in your world?
Oh man, not too much. My daughter started high school today, so that was a big move. So we live 5 minutes from the school, and yet it still took a half an hour. So we did dropped her off. I was in the car line. So that part of me, I thought that was going to be my 7 minutes of alone time with my daughter. It ended up being a half an hour, which is not terrible. But it was fun.
I assume it gets better over time.
We'll see. I think it does. I hope it does. Yeah.
So let me ask you guys before we jump into the blog, do you agree with me that if you can present through a single point in the firewall or a single hole in the environment over a very capable protocol, everything the users are trying to do, and you have a resiliency on the back end that reboots it back to a gold image for a lot of the stuff, or maybe it's a one-time launch of an application and then the image that was running in gets destroyed afterwards. Are those security plays to you guys?
100%. So when you talk to any security team, they'll tell you that security is a layered approach, right? So you need to have multiple things that play into that, and that's a pretty powerful couple of layers. So just from the layer perspective, having that one pinhole, only presenting, not deploying, that's a pretty big layer. But even just containing any sort of security incident, the fact that you can roll back to a gold image is a pretty powerful tool as well. And if those are the only two you used out of the Citrix stack, highly powerful. There's a lot more we can do, but I mean, absolutely.
Yeah. Todd, and you just touched on the control aspects of it, not including all of the monitoring, reporting, and the adjusting, being able to adjust that user experience, but also the security requirements based on the goal of reducing those threat vectors that are out there. I think that's another critical component of what we're trying to do here.
Yeah. And I think in the blog, we're going to talk about things like secure private access and session recording and other things too. And I mean, those are, or at least we're going to reference them. Those are massive security things within the security of just the overall concept. Now, if I were to say, Todd and Geremy, most customers I run into don't use a presentation approach as one of their layers because it's a security play. They use it because it's the best way to make bad applications behave better. What would you say?
I would agree with that. Yeah.
I would say yes. I think that's how it started. To be fair, I think that's how, application virtualization was initially pitched, right? So think about it, 25 years ago, what do we have? We had dial-up, right? We had worse than dial-up in some cases. We actually had dialing into servers, so I know Andy and Todd were both in an era where we had those digicards in the back of a server where you actually dialed into the server, right? Yeah. So that was the initial use case. You take a fat client server app and you want to do that across dial-up, get out of here, right? And I think that's where the initial use case made sense. You layer on thin clients, if folks think of that less of a security play in some cases and more of a low-cost endpoint use case, which, by the way, is still valid. But, when we talk about cost savings and that being a big part of it, I think what gets bypassed, you're absolutely right, is the security piece to this.
Yeah, I like to think that when I first saw an application launched through presentation, whatever, I immediately thought, hey, this is a security play. In hindsight, I like to think I thought that, and maybe I did, but it sure has proven itself to be over the years. And then layer in, a non-persistent image, which I have lots of debates by myself sometimes about non-persistent versus persistent. I want to go non-persistent anytime I can. I'll go persistent if it means moving forward and not getting stuck. But
so let's ask this one, Andy. So we see this deployment, and it's not uncommon. It's let me fire up my VPN, and then once my VPN is up, then I'm going to fire off my Citrix session, right? Now, granted, let's forget ADC for a second. Let's forget NetScaler and the gateway and the proxy. But the fact that, the folks are thinking, hey, you know what? I've got to fire up a VPN before I can do this application presentation. Just tells you that folks aren't necessarily thinking of it as a security layer, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, you added an extra layer that didn't need to be there, and it made it less secure. That's craziness.
Mm-hmm.
So let me come to both of you guys and say, what's the point in this blog? Todd, you want to go first?
Yeah, so I think the main point that we're trying to talk about in this blog is really some of the advances that have been introduced over the past year, specific to security. And it's not we have to deploy all of these capabilities. You can pick and choose. I mean, obviously, if you deploy all of them and if you utilize all of these advances, then it's a better story. But you don't have to go down, kind of pick and choose what applies to you in your individual requirements and your individual situations.
So this is beyond the conversation we were just having about whether you see this as security. This is, if you're going to do this, then there's things you need to consider turning on in that scenario.
Yep.
Geremy, your thoughts on the overall idea here?
So I think there are a couple of additional layers that get introduced here. So number one, what you just described in presenting an app versus deploying is great, right? But at the end of the day, we still aren't, what's a good way to say this, locking down that endpoint. You've got the workspace app running on the endpoint. The first thing we talk about here are some things around something called app protection. And the idea is, at the end of the day, I still have to enter in my password on that local endpoint. I still am looking at the screen in some cases because I've had this app presented to me. And I could be on a Teams call where someone can see, what application I have running. The idea is can we add some additional layers of security on that endpoint? And there's two in particular that we've had for probably 2 or 3 years now. One is we can help with key logging. You start typing your password into, a virtual session or even the workspace app itself to log in. We can obfuscate, which is a very hard word to say, that password that you type in, so that if you had a keylogger running, if your endpoint was compromised, you couldn't see what that password was. Same thing for sharing your screen. So you've got a virtual app running. You are sharing your screen on a team session. You could actually keep folks within that team session from seeing what that virtual app is doing, right? So again, another layer in protecting the information that might be, you might be running, right? So the idea is we've added 2 additional layers, and we've added something fairly recent, which is called anti-DLL injection, which again, if you've got a compromised endpoint, something could introduce things like malware, which at the end of the day is not going to impact your hosted session. So something running out of the data center, but it could impact the endpoint. There's another layer we can wrap on top of this.
So I want to go back to the conversation around key logging and logos or imaging on the screen, like watermarking. I mean, those, up until you said it like 2 years ago, those were like the far-reaching things we could not prevent in the delivered session. And then 2 or 3 years ago, that was solved. And now we move on to more advanced things. Todd, have you seen people adopting the key logging and the watermarking as much as you thought they would?
Yeah, and I think this is something that it's starting to become a normal practice, is to make sure that organizations are protected from key logging, right? So they're either putting it and installing it on endpoint devices through the common IT managed devices that are out there. But we're also seeing it, people want to see that built into their products and there's the services that they're consuming, right? So how do I know that it's not being that there's not a keylogger put into the web service, right? So a lot of the security consultants that are out there, that's one of the things they're looking at when they review websites, right? Is that susceptible to keylogging? So you're talking about it on the endpoints, but you're also talking on anyone who's providing you a service. And it's more than just putting in the secure connection or the secure session. It's actually looking at that one level deeper. So we're seeing a lot of that. We're also seeing a lot of folks, and a lot of this is based on the jurisdiction that the customer resides in or where they're delivering their service from. And that is around, is a watermark, does that on your screen automatically give you as an additional protection, and more specifically legal protection, right? Is that now considered intellectual property? Is that now considered a trademark or a service mark? Is there information that we can put inside that watermark to make sure that, if someone does do a screen capture or someone does do a photograph of that screen, is that protected under either copyright or other types of legal protections that are out there?
Yeah. I mean, at a minimum, putting your stamp on it, which is basically what you're doing there, yep, shows some degree of ownership that if you took it, it wasn't by accident. You knew you took it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for me, Todd, so let me ask the question again. Have you seen, so I know we love it. I know it makes sense. Have you seen widespread adoption of those two things? And if you could kind of quantify your answer.
Yeah.
Have you seen widespread adoption of it?
So I've seen more widespread adoption in the anti-key logging requirements that are out there. And probably widespread is, it's between the 40 and 50% mark of customers. The screen capture, or not the screen, sorry, the watermarking is a little bit more or less widespread, but it is a little bit more in specific use cases, so specific industries.
Yeah.
We're seeing the watermarks being put into, healthcare and banking as an example.
Here's why I asked that question, because I thought when we had those two boxes checked after all these years, that the security guys, I would not have to convince them this was a security play anymore, that would make it obvious to them it was. And I'm still having, I'll say, polite arguments with security folks trying to point out that this layered approach that includes deliver versus deploy is a massive step towards securing an environment. And the watermarking and the key logging did not bring them in my direction as much as I thought it would.
And I think this goes back to the arguments that occur in most organizations between the operational side and the security side. Operations and administrators sometimes will look at the overhead associated with adding an anti-key logger or adding in that session watermarking into the environment, right? It does add some overhead in some cases, especially several years ago when we first introduced it. There was some additional overhead required. So sometimes unless you were talking directly to the security folks, that message sometimes got either watered down or left out completely.
So, I'll say it this way. Do we have customers who are using presented applications, presented desktops as a security play? Yes. In fact, it's a pretty significant deployment. We see it a lot, but you got to think about where this technology sits within the organization sometimes. So for instance, a lot of organizations are leveraging this from the application development or the application, department. Folks who manage apps are the ones who own Citrix. And so it becomes more of an application delivery play, to your point originally, and less of a security play. So we're going to let the apps guys do what they do, and we're going to have the security team come in behind and protect what the app guys are doing. Like, that is some pretty classic mentality that I see a lot. Now, having said all that, we do have some folks who have been compromised where they come to us and go, hey, we've got to find a better way to do this. We want to quit putting stuff on our endpoints because we had a ransomware attack that started from an endpoint across a VPN. All right, we can't do this anymore. Let's pick a better way to do this. And so they'll present the apps and all of a sudden it kind of clicks. But a lot of times it's just, where does Citrix sit within the organization is going to define how it gets looked at from within the organization. And right. So you have a leadership change where, someone comes in and goes, this is going to be a part of our strategy. It's going to take that sometimes to make the switch.
Yeah, somebody's got to be looking for where those layers of what we've been doing, how we can make those more secure and why they matter more or less. Let me give you an example. Going back to the whole original conversation around Citrix being Citrix and presentation type things versus deploying being a security. Todd, do you remember when you used to go to a safe deposit box at the bank and they would take you into the vault where the deposit boxes were and you would get out whatever you get out right there in the vault? Did you ever experience that?
Yes. Yeah. And oftentimes, the bank manager had a key and I had a key.
Yeah.
They would remove the box out, and we would actually, the bank I used to do business with, we'd actually go into a separate small little room.
Yeah.
And then I would be left in the room with the contents of the box.
Yeah.
And then when I was done, we would then go in, put slide the box back in the vault, and then both turn the keys at the same time.
Okay.
In order to lock it back in. Right.
Okay.
So that was a very traditional, it required two different people with two different keys, going through multiple different physical security barriers to get into the vault to actually go there. Now, they didn't care about what the contents were, but they did care about the overarching packet and the containerization of the contents.
Yeah. Well, and I may be wrong here because I haven't done that in forever, but I'm under the impression you don't go in the vault with them anymore. They just bring the box to you. Is that, or am I wrong? Do you actually go in?
You know what? I can't tell you because I haven't had a safe security box or safe deposit box in a while. I'm just going back on what it used to be. But think about it. I mean, banks oftentimes were the leading. They set the standard for a lot of these security measures that are still in place today.
For sure. Geremy, have you gone to a safe deposit box?
I have never been to a safe deposit box. Yeah. Yeah. Now I do remember the goofy looking key my parents had, but I got to witness that firsthand.
Okay. So my analogy is not going to play out here, but I think back in the day, you actually got to go in the vault. I remember going in the vault. I mean, I couldn't see the money, it was all locked up, but these days when I think Citrix, you never go in the vault. You see the vault, but you never go in the vault. And that's an extra layer of security that just makes it almost impossible to do a lot of bad things. All right. So Geremy covered anti-DLL injection. Todd, you want to just cover it again real quick? Because I kind of brought us back and now we're going forward again. Your take on anti-DLL injection as a additional security play?
Yeah. So it obviously is an additional, it's an additional feature that can be turned off and turned on. Based on what you want to do. And DLLs have always been a challenge, right? Especially where the user certainly doesn't understand what a DLL is. Developers are getting and using DLLs from all over the place. And oftentimes, we don't have that much interaction anymore with the operating systems that are opening and closing these DLLs. So, we've got to have some way of saying, yes, this is above or this is outside of normal operating parameters. And this is one of those things that can really help with this.
Yeah. Geremy, anything else to add to the DLL conversation?
So I think, going back to the security play and the layers, the idea is we should not have to leverage anti-DLL injection. There should be some protection that the security team has authorized to put on the endpoint that should catch screen loggers as rogue applications that are going to inject a DLL. That should be caught. This is the backup plan, right? This is the additional layer, which, by the way, is probably already included with most customers. So if you're a DAS Premium Plus customer, you've already got this, right? So it shouldn't stop you to go turn this thing on. Just add an additional layer. But ultimately, to stop 0-day attacks, sometimes things make it past the first layer. This is something you should have tacked on and turned on automatically because you probably already own it. Yeah. Just to enable it. Yep.
How about overhead as it relates to this thing? Any concerns there?
Like processing overhead? Just what would? Man, I don't have a good feel for that. Do you, Todd? I don't think it's much.
No, I don't have any. I don't know what the current the overhead requirements are.
Okay. I can promise you, it's not as tough as antivirus.
Yeah.
It's probably where your question's coming from.
The last statement in this paragraph said, this is a huge step in preventing unwanted data leaks and saves admin time on security patching and updates. Well, yeah. And your maybe YouTube, but people in general won't tell me Citrix is a security play. It is, especially when you look at it from a suite of things that make up layers of things.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Todd, we'll let you lead on this one. Contextual app protection for workspace and storefronts. Tell me what that means.
So one of the challenges that a lot of times we've had is adjusting security policies based on a variety of different things. And one of them is, obviously who you are, where you're coming in from, what device you're on, kind of how do we protect on the any plane. This one actually allows you to increase the granularity based on, specific user contexts, right? So if I'm on a controlled browser, I'm going to have a different experience. I'll have different controls put on me by either the workspace itself. So the workspace app will be communicating back with the workspace controllers, or you can do it on the storefront itself and basically say, you know what, if I'm accessing this application from this storefront, then I need to have a certain amount of additional controls put in place.
Geremy, thoughts?
Yeah, so the key here is being able to identify whether folks are, internal, external. So that would be a thing. It's based on device posturing as well. So it's just being able to tier what kind of control that you put on, workspace and storefront, right? So, it's something that we've done as a part of, like, say, smart access on NetScaler for years. But now we're adding it as a service out of, Citrix Cloud if you'd like it, or, we can do that as well on-prem.
And help me, when you say workspace, are you talking workspace app, workspace landing web page? What does workspace mean in this conversation?
So in this conversation, it's cloud delivered storefront, that workspace, not so much workspace app, but workspace as a service, right? And that's versus, like, say, storefront, which is 100% on-prem, right? So if you're hitting storefront, you're either doing it directly or you're doing it through a NetScaler that sits in a resource location. Yep.
Got it. Okay. Awesome. Thanks. All right. Next section says bringing secure private access to everyone. Todd, can you define secure private access for us real quick? Because I find a lot of people have no idea what this really is.
Yeah, sure. So secure private access is, once again, a component of our zero trust network access, or ZTNA. And really what it does is it encompasses replacing things like a VPN, improving your security posture overall, and being able to really give you a lot more control and visibility into, who's coming into your network, what they're allowed to do, and more importantly, gives you that visibility into what they're doing while they're in the session or what they're doing while they're connected.
Geremy, how do you want to explain it?
So I am coming up with, I'm constantly evolving my analogy for this because I'm trying to figure out the best way to say it. But when you think about how we've delivered apps in the past, it's all been hosted, that's, sat in the data center, we've presented it. Honestly, it's the first half of this conversation we've had. But, with secure private access, we're talking about how can we make I don't want to say a better VPN, because that's the worst analogy. That's what I'm trying to fix. But the idea that we don't want to turn everything on. We just want to present at a network level these applications. So for instance, in the past, I might have launched a web page, an internal web page, by opening up a VPN, opening up my browser and going direct in. There's a lot of security implications with that. So the idea is, what if I could give you specific access to internal websites, heck, even public facing websites, and wrap some control around that as well. So for instance, one of the common ones that I use at Citrix here is, listen, I've got a handful of cloud tools that I use all the time. So they give me insight into, cloud tenants, and, I'm constantly helping customers out on the back end. But these are internal only tools. So I am accessing them through secure private access. So I'm not having to fire up a VPN. The key is it's paired with an enterprise browser. So the idea is, if I'm, not presenting like I have in the past, and I've turned all these security controls on to protect the delivery of that app, well, what happens if I'm accessing it directly from my endpoint? I'm firing up my local browser, going to that web page. How do I protect that? Well, that's where the enterprise browser comes in. So I can throw the same security controls when I'm accessing that internal website, because I'm doing it from a protected browser. And that is huge. That's actually a game changer.
Yeah. So just to be clear, on the blog, it talks about secure private access, which is your way of being able to get into the internal environment without having to do a full-blown VPN. And you guys were pretty political about how you said it. My answer is it's 2023. If your organization is using a VPN for anything other than hardcore administrative stuff that you got to get back in the back end to do it, you're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. Sometimes I get more derogatory than that, but you're doing it wrong. Zero trust, secure private access technology is the way to do it. And then Geremy, you took it to the next level, which by the way, I'm going to show you this is and then the computer I'm sitting in front of right now. These are my default apps. And look what I have for my browser.
There it is.
Enterprise browser. And I'm having that conversation because there's other players in the space now that are having, non-consumer browsers, aka enterprise browsers, Citrix being one. And I've got people on my team going, that's a great idea. And I'm like, what are you talking about? We've had that for over a year now. And then you pair it up with something like secure private access, and you've got peanut butter and jelly and one heck of a good, sandwich. But there's still so many people. When I say enterprise browser, they start talking about secure browser service, and they don't even understand that for the last 30 years, 20 years at least, they've been using a consumer browser to get work done, which is a very, very bad thing.
So what's different in this blog here is this has traditionally been something delivered from Citrix Cloud. So SPA, Secure Private Access, was a service. Now this works completely off the cloud, completely, storefront on-prem, NetScaler gateway on-prem, that sort of thing. So not required to have the cloud tenant to do it. And now, and this is what it's trying to point out here, is it also includes enterprise browser. So I can take my enterprise browser, not the service, take my enterprise browser, connect that through my NetScaler through Storefront to access my internal apps. And what this video and the blog does is walk through what that user experience actually is.
Yeah, no brainer. Todd, go ahead.
I was just going to agree. I mean, I think the move towards a secured browser, that's enterprise class, that has all of the policies that you can put in there, just like you would, what we're trying to do here is replace the need to publish a browser as a published application, right? So have it be native, have it be included in the components, have it being able to be accessed directly from the workspace. Having it show up as one of your common default browsers is absolutely critical. And I think this is one of those features that oftentimes gets overlooked, and is certainly a lot of times misunderstood.
What's the version of Windows they had over in Europe, or they have everywhere now, but Europe forced it to happen where they made where the operating system came with no browser? Is that like is it the N edition?
I think it was. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Was this Windows XP or was this Windows 7?
I think it's been all of them. I think the Europeans forced them to remove the browser from the operating system, which with Internet Explorer, you really couldn't, but with Edge, maybe you can, anyway, actually you can't. I've looked into it. You can't. But to me, an ideal world going forward is you get your Windows OS and you systematically insert an enterprise browser versus having to have one on the system that's, built for consumer use cases.
Yeah, I had to set up a new machine for one of my nephews over the weekend, and it was interesting going to install Chrome on it. The first thing I had to do was open up Edge, because that was what was installed on the factory default, to go and download Chrome so I could actually install that and replace his browser with his default browser as that.
How would you get a browser if Windows didn't have a browser?
Your IT team would put it on there, and it would be
on. Have to be, yeah.
Nerd and find out what the FTP server is, and then connect to the FTP server, the public side of the FTP server, and work your way through the libraries.
So you
put the Citrix Workspace app on there, and it will be on there. Done.
Exactly.
So Windows N Edition, there was an XP version of this. It shipped without Windows Media Player, was what it was, but there was some antitrusting there as well. And I think there's a version that didn't do a browser. So that's interesting.
Yeah. All right. Next section. I can't remember who's up. I'll go with Todd. Better compliance around session recording. Todd, give us a brief history on session recording and what this particular scenario means.
So it's interesting because session recording originally started off with being able to record a specific application that was being delivered via a Citrix session. No pun intended. But within a Zen app context, right? So if I can deliver, an application. So say, for instance, it's Excel, and I wanted to be able to see what the person was doing when they're inside of the Excel spreadsheet. I could turn on session recording, and then I would have to then, get the administrator to review the recording. We then changed it so that you could actually share the recording out to a specified group of people, because oftentimes the recording didn't need to be reviewed by the IT administrator, it needed to be reviewed by someone in training or compliance or whatever. So what we did is we then expanded that into include desktop recording. So being able to record the entire desktop, so the VDI session, the Xen desktop session, and then being able to continuously leverage the recording capabilities to identify, potential security breaches, people not doing those tasks as they should be. So it could be a training issue. And then oftentimes it's being used for compliance. So think about bank transactions that are large in scale. I want to see who was actually doing that and what they were clicking on while they were in that session. But it's really being designed and being utilized primarily for compliance issues.
Right. Geremy, your thoughts on session recording, its origins, and how it's worked, and any real world examples where, it proved its worth?
So Todd specifically talked, and this blog is specifically focused on security. But I think one of the other areas we've seen this used is training. Mm-hmm. So being able to reproduce an issue, a user will call in and say, "Hey, I'm having this issue." Actually being able to go back and say, "Hey, what you're doing, let's do this a little bit differently." So just being able to understand what users are doing and kind of train them up on how to do something a little bit differently. So that is the other use case I've seen. How this service has evolved is becoming more and more managed. So one of the reasons most customers have not deployed is simply because historically there's just been a lot to go turn on to get session recording up and going. And so what's nice now is the session recording service. You can deploy a lot of it, I would say hands-free, but just recently we had the ability to deploy most of it out to Azure, and it's automated, which is pretty slick.
And maybe to give this blog its due, some of this is talking about the ability to manage those configurations and rollouts. Is that really what this portion here is? The cloud client update kind of control of the thing?
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
Hey,
By the way,
what
was this originally called?
Smart Auditor. Smart Auditor.
Smart Auditor.
So I Googled that because the name escaped me, and as it turns out, none of the Google hit, but I've got web chat GPT running on the side, so it automatically looks it up too. And of course, chat GPT was right.
I don't know if you guys saw that or not, but I just sent you a chat. I just popped up on screen. So Microsoft is releasing, like as we speak, an enterprise browser. It'll still be Edge, but whatever. My point is, you got to get this consumer browser crap out of the way. It's a problem.
It is.
All right. So let's go, Geremy. I think new on-premise security features for session recording. What is this part of the blog calling out?
Oh, let's take a look. I think there's a couple of different things here. So number one, just managing who can see recordings. So for instance, as you expand this out and you give more people access, just being able to tier who can see what, just notifying users before they're logged out and their session's locked is pretty important. The other piece to this, maybe it's not called out here, is there's an integration with the security analytics service as well. So maybe that's a little bit of the tie-in there. If something were to happen and your machine was to maybe trigger security analytics, you could log some folks out and maybe make sure they have an update before it happens.
We haven't talked about security analytics at all in any of this. That's a whole nother element of taking the workspace and bringing it to a place where it's got all kinds of security initiatives going on real time or as on demand as needed.
Mm-hmm.
Todd, anything else you'd want to highlight around the session recording feature?
I think the comment you just made around the security analytics piece of it, what if you could have a security analytics event trigger session recording to automatically start, and then once the recording is done, then notify not the administrator, but notify the person who's responsible for reviewing that, and make it seamless. right? So that's a critical step, and that's a critical move in the right direction when it comes to making it less cumbersome for security administrators to really do their jobs. And it's a piece of the automation stack that a lot of people overlook.
Yeah. So this last section says the tools you want to create the secure environment you need, and then it lists a whole bunch of stuff: Google Identity Authentication, Azure Dynamic Security Groups, and Trusted Launch Support for Azure Ephemeral OS Disk. I think my main point in calling out this whole blog as well as others is, Citrix kind of built this space, and you guys are still investing. Cloud Software Group's investing in what Citrix does from a security place. I can't tell you how many people just assume Citrix is done and there's no innovation going on. I think there's probably more innovation going on now than there was a year ago. Just got to make sure people realize it.
I think what's interesting is security doesn't live in a silo, and you've got to be able to integrate with a lot of what folks bring to their conversation, right? So part of the hybrid talk we have is the fact that you've got to integrate together with things that you got. So multiple clouds, multiple things like that. And we're just extending that out to security as well, right? So we understand a lot of folks are using things like Azure AD. There is a security platform with Azure AD that folks are going to leverage. How do we integrate with that? Later today, we're going to do a podcast around ServiceNow. The idea being, how do we integrate Citrix Cloud, the on-prem stuff, with ServiceNow? In fact, we're going to do that on our next podcast. But the idea is you've got to be able to tie these things together, and security is no different, right? So how can we consume? How can we contribute to, sort of the broad solution that a customer is going to have? How do we integrate into it?
Part of every conversation you have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you got to think the security elements that go along with it. Todd, your thoughts on what the Cloud Software Group and the Citrix subcomponent of it's doing around innovation around security?
Yeah, when I first read this paragraph, I'm like, this is a tease for the next iteration of this blog. I would assume that Monica's probably working on, teeing up some additional information when it comes to, the improvements that we're making that are not just around, Zen app performance or, the next feature within Zen Desktop. What we're really doing when it comes to looking at security and looking at security as a holistic component of what we do, right? And, we used to have one of the slides that we always had in our decks that I absolutely hated was the secure by design slide, because it didn't explain exactly what that meant. It was just, well, yeah, we're working on security. Well, we need to lead with that. And this blog is yet again another example of, where security is a critical component in every single thing we're doing when it comes to developing an application, developing a product, developing a service. It cannot be an add-on. It has to be an integral, it's got to be built into the foundation. It's the rebar that goes into the concrete. It's not just something that we add on at the very end.
Did you just say security is the rebar? That might be my new favorite analogy there, Todd.
Yeah. Feel free to use it anytime, man. Geremy.
I will. I'm sure he will too.
I'm sure I will.
and sometimes that security might be as simple as turning off, local client drive mapping or printer redirection or printer and print redirection. There's so many things that in the presentation protocol of ICA, HDX, if you will, that's in there from a security perspective that was enable customers to do stuff at the same time can easily be turned off. Those are security features if you want to stop and look at it the right way.
Yep.
And look, if you're an organization still using VPNs for users to get work done, you need to stop because it's wrong. It's wrong. Well, guys, thank you for the time today. Talk Citrix and security. I'm adamant that it is, and I fight the good fight all the time, talking to other security folks, vendors that don't even keep it in the loop as one of the layers. But without a doubt, it's one of the layers in our world to bring security to ourselves as well as our customers. So I appreciate you guys talking through this.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, guys.
Well, I'll tie something back into what Geremy said. We're spending a ton of money internally to implement ServiceNow for ourselves and for our customers. And I may have done this with you before, but then I asked my team, okay, this is great. Why are we spending so much money? What's our goal here? And the answer was security. implement ServiceNow for security. I'm like, I don't understand that. And he said, well, look, until you get everything into one place, you can't secure it because you don't know what you have.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to be launching that series where we talk about ServiceNow a lot. That's enabling user-enabled, initiated workflows, very important. Getting your hands around your virtual and physical environment so you can secure it equally as important.
Couldn't agree more.
All right, gentlemen, enjoy the rest of your Monday.
All right.
Take
Thanks,
care.
guys.